Hey there, how's it going? This is James Tripp. This is a video for James Tripp on YouTube, and we are discussing what's possible / impossible when it comes to personal change. This video is sponsored by the forthcoming live online training, Creating Courage and Fearlessness. This is a program for you if you feel you've been laying low or hanging back in life due to either overt, strong activations of your threat response systems or just those subtle activations, that quiet voice that talks you out of doing the things that you really want to do. If you're interested in this program, you can check out the details on the link. Now, I want to say first of all why I've chosen this topic. It actually stems from a question that was asked on the last video that I put out, which was, can anyone be hypnotized? I don't always put hypnosis content up here on the channel. That was the origin of the channel, but people know that I'm skilled in the use of hypnosis and that I work with people doing change work. But I've also mentioned in several places that I do not work under the frame hypnotherapist anymore. And I mentioned in that video why. Right, that it doesn't necessarily create the right kind of engagement that is most conducive to getting people to shift their minds in useful ways, let's say. I'm not going to go back into that because I covered that in the last video. I also pointed out in that video that hypnosis isn't some special magical state or some special magical craft that overrides people's natural cognitive processes, their natural psychology, this kind of thing. That it is instead more the art and craft of engaging people's cognitive processes and steering them towards different ends, towards change, okay? So I've got a question come up in the comments there, and I wanted to read it out, but unfortunately it's disappeared. So I'm assuming the person that asked the question, it was a great question, but I'm assuming they must have deleted it for some reason, and I don't know why. But the question was, as a practitioner of change work, how do I frame that up for clients so as to get the right kind of buy-in, because it's really important, the engagement that you have, you want the right kind of engagement. How do I frame that up if I'm not talking about hypnosis? Now, I've just given a clue there that in my view, whilst I value everything I've learned from hypnosis, I value the tools of hypnosis, I don't want people thinking that they don't have to engage. They can just be super, super passive and just kick back and some magical force is going to do something for them. Because how they engage and that they engage intentionally and proactively with an open mind for change is really, really important. Okay, this is what stacks the odds in favor of change rather than a more passive kind of engagement. I'm not saying you can't get change from that. Right? Never say never. Of course you can. There's many, many instances of that happening. But I'm interested in stacking the odds for change. And that's true whether I'm working with a client or whether I'm working with myself. It's true whether I'm actually doing some change work with somebody or simply coaching somebody on or in mind skills that they can use to transform their own experience ongoing in their daily lives. It's always the same. So the question is, how do I frame for change? Well, this is going to kind of depend upon how people come into me. This is not a prescription for people to do it this way. This is how I do it. This is partly due to the context in which I work. But mainly, I do so by sharing what I believe to be the truth about what's possible when it comes to personal change. Okay? Now, I'm not one who delivers a script for clients. So when people come in and they're working with me, say via Rock to Recovery, I don't usually do a lot of pre-framing. I just do some stuff around how the sessions are going to work. And I super humbly, I suppose, frame myself as somebody who maybe has something useful for them, maybe has something they can make use of. Some people go, well, that's not very inspiring, but we are in the middle of a conversation and I'm monitoring the feedback I'm getting. So I'm not just like playing it down and being super humble. It's a way of inviting people in. It's a way of playing what I call one across rather than one up. I don't think it helps to play one up a lot of the time with clients. You want to play one across. Definitely not one down, definitely not one up, but one across. So I co-create with my clients. I always keep things on an equal level like that. But what I do want to do is I want them to get a sense of what's possible for them. Because a lot of people, when they come in, they want to make changes. They've got a sense that the things that are wrong with them are somehow deep-rooted. They are either deep-rooted in their character, deep-rooted in their personality, or deeply rooted in some kind of experience they may have had, some kind of traumatic experience. And there's a lot of stories around trauma and how that works at the moment these days that can invite people into believing that once they are traumatized, there is some sort of horrendous now shift in the deep geology of their mind, so they can never have a happy or good life entirely again. They can at best maybe cope. That isn't true, right? That is just not true. So what I want to do is I want people to open to the possibility of change. And I'm going to tell you right now why I believe that profound change for human beings is not only possible, but actually a lot more commonplace than people even realize. Okay? So first things first. Many years ago when I was an NLP trainer, I used to do public presentations. I'd often run this little piece that I would say people are patterned. They walk the way they walk, they talk the way they talk, and they think the way they think, right? Now, there's a lot of truth to this, and I've talked about this recently. I've talked about the upsides of that frame and the downsides of that frame, and the power of recognizing there's an I that chooses that sits outside of our patterning. But the access to the I that chooses is actually part of our patterning. So there's a weird sort of self-reflexive thing going on there. But there's truth in this. We walk the way we walk, we talk the way we talk, we think the way we think. But the question is why? How much of that is down to nature? How much of that is down to nurture? Now, that is a question that will never be answered, but it is absolutely clear that our experiences play a role in shaping our patterning. Our learning plays a role in shaping our patterning. Who we're exposed to plays a role in shaping our patterning. Even our choices that we make in life as to which paths we go down, which paths we don't, end up playing a role in shaping our patterning. What we do not normally do, or most people do not do this until they get to a certain age, and most people actually never do this, is play a conscious role in the shaping of our patterning. Right? We allow it to happen semi-consciously or unconsciously, okay? But most of what people are is a collection of patterns. Now, they may have certain tendencies within their sort of genetic predispositions and this kind of thing, but in all honesty, and I really do believe that people do actually, but that doesn't mean that they are bound or restricted by those tendencies, right? So somebody may have a tendency towards being more analytically minded, for example, but that doesn't mean that they cannot develop other ways of relating to life and the world, other ways of being in the world, right? Of course they can. I always say to people, whatever your genetic predispositions, whatever you choose to change or get better at, you can change or get better at, right? You might not change absolutely or become world class at that thing. It's like, I don't play basketball, but if I started to play basketball, I'd be pretty terrible. I seriously doubt I'm ever going to be like an NBA level basketball player. I mean, it's just not going to happen. I'm 50 years old. I'm a bit behind the curve, all of that kind of thing. And there may be a whole bunch of other things that are stacked against me there. But there is absolutely no question that I could get considerably better at playing basketball, right? And now this is true for everything in life. There is nothing you cannot get considerably better at doing. Take something like emotional regulation, what's sometimes called emotional regulation. The ability to not get swept up in an emotional response or a semantic reaction, right? We might have a habit of doing that. We might have never really done anything to change that. We might go, well, that's just who I am. That's how I am. I get easily upset by things, we might say, right? And we live into that truth, into that story. But the truth of the matter is there isn't a human being on the planet who can't get better at, say, emotional regulation, who can't get better at stepping back from their immediate responses and finding that gap between stimulus and response. That is absolutely true for everybody, right? So one of the things I often point out to clients is I say, you know, one of the things that I know about you, which perhaps you don't even know about you, is that this thing that you think maybe you're stuck with or maybe you've thought is a really deep problem, you can change this, right? Now, I make this really, really clear to people. And I say, I know you might think that you're a special case of screwed up or something like that. I often use stronger language, depends on the client. And when I say this, people often go, yes, they think there's some special, unique case of screwed up. Most people walk around in life hiding what they think are their flaws, their deficiencies, this kind of thing, and they think like everybody else has got stuff nailed down, and they don't. Even people who go around criticizing others are often doing it. I'm not saying always, but often doing it from a place of trying to hide their own sense of inadequacy. Right? So people often do think that they are uniquely and especially screwed up, right? So especially unfit for purpose, so to speak. Right? So I point out to people, I say, you know, I know you think you're a special case of screwed up, but I can guarantee you, you are not. Right? This thing, if you really want to change this, if you really want to transform this, if you really want to have a different experience around this, you absolutely can. Right? Now, as an aside here, note how I say, you want to transform this, you want to change this, you want to have a different experience around it. I give 3 choices that are all positively angled, but are also sort of nebulous. They sound specific, but they're nebulous. There's a reason for this. Whilst we can evolve change in ourselves, whilst we can generatively steer ourselves in better direction, we usually cannot design change for ourselves. Okay? If we sit down and we try and go, specifically, this is how I need to be. I'm not saying that's a redundant exercise. I'm not saying it's not valuable. It can be a very valuable exercise, but we will usually fail to get exactly what we want. We won't get that target, right? It can be useful as a generative catalyst. It's a useful voice in the general conversation of change to be specific about what you want. But if you think that you're going to be able to redesign yourself or re-engineer yourself in a very much command and control fashion to get that, you're going to be wrong. We human beings are organic, right? We learn, grow, change, adapt organically, right? There is a process of interaction and emergence that we can steer in useful directions. That is not the same as designing change. But I make this clear to people. I don't make that necessarily clear up front. There's nothing I guarantee to make clear up front. Every conversation with a client is different. But I will point this out often. I will say, look, one of the reasons I say, you know, you might be wondering how I can say that when I don't know you personally. We've only just met, right? And I'm pacing any kind of doubt or objection in their mind at that point. I say the reason I can say that is because I know that you are a human being, right? And one thing is true about us as human beings is we are the paragon of learners and changers and growers out of all creatures on this earth. And we are probably the only creature on this planet who is capable of bringing their own intentionality to bear upon our own system to change things, right? And we can change things powerfully. Okay, so I point out here that it's about learning, growing, and adapting, okay? And sometimes I used to do this bit a little bit more where I would point out this is absolutely true of you as a human being, and it has to be. I say it's like an aeroplane. If I make a paper aeroplane, there are certain things that need to be true about it, certain facts that need to be true. It needs to work in a particular way aerodynamically in order for us to know that it's a plane and call it a plane, right? Because certain things are true of planes. This thing that I'm telling you is true of human beings, all human beings. And unless you are not human, let me just check in with you. You are human, are you not? They go, yes. I say, then it's true of you. Okay, so if I need to get people to buy in for change, now this conversation isn't going to be the same with everybody because some people are just open to the fact that they can change. They don't need to be recruited into that worldview, so to speak, right? But some do. But I just want to emphasize here that it is possible for us to change because this is what we do. This is what human beings do, and it is what we do best. I've often said this, you see, one of the things about hypnosis as well, or the way a lot of people do hypnosis, is hypnosis emphasizes the power of the unconscious mind, so to speak. This is very common across many, many hypnosis paradigms, and often sort of denigrates or sidelines the conscious mind, right? Now, when I'm working with clients, I recognize I'm working with a full system. We haven't got consciousness. We haven't evolved consciousness just weirdly and accidentally. It serves a function in our lives, in our being. So the question is, what is that function? Now, I happen to think that consciousness is not a doing function. Consciousness does not help us to do things. Think about it. Everything that you do well, you do with high degrees of unconsciousness, and often when you bring consciousness into it, it gets in the way. Right? Classic example is what's called the yips. Golfers get the yips. Right? I don't play golf, so I may have the wrong end of the stick with this or the wrong end of the club. But the yips is where the golfer, they need to be in a flow. They need to be in a flow state, but their conscious mind gets in the way and starts thinking unuseful thought loops. Right? And their performance state drops. Their flow state gets destroyed. So it's clear that consciousness doesn't help us perform, not consciousness in that way, not self-reflective consciousness, doesn't usually help us perform. Even something like driving a car, you might go, well, I'm conscious when I'm driving a car. Yes, you are, but you're in a flow state. You're not overly conscious and you're not self-conscious. You are aware more than you are conscious. And interestingly enough, most of what you're aware of when you're driving, you're aware of outside of consciousness. People don't think about this. They think that they must be conscious of everything they're aware of. That is not so. They're aware of much that they are unconscious of. So what is consciousness for? Now, when I'm working with people, I make a lot of use of consciousness, not to try and override, not to try and do. To me, consciousness is there as a mechanism for self-generated change. It is the primary mechanism for self-generated change. So when we get caught in a particular pattern of doing something, it's like our consciousness gets swept along by that pattern. Our consciousness is inside of that pattern. Like, let's say somebody gets, they take offense, they emotionally react, their consciousness is swept up inside of that, and they have a complete experience. They go into a trance that shapes reality in a particular way. They can't necessarily get out of it. Their consciousness has been swept up in it, right? Now, where consciousness is a powerful faculty for change is where it disconnects from and brings itself to bear upon the patterns that are at play, or the patterns that are in play, so to speak. So we've got this subject-object thing. Now, this isn't about trying to control from a position of consciousness. It's about setting up new generative learning and feedback loops from this position of consciousness. This is not a strictly intellectual thing. In fact, it's not much of an intellectual thing at all. It's about a quality of attention with consciousness and a quality of intention with consciousness. Okay? Now, we can all do this. If you look at most people, they have mind shifts all the time that bring them into different ways of being in the world and different ways of relating in the world, to change habits, all sorts of things. Right? I have a particular interest in smokers. I often ask when people say, I used to smoke and I quit. I say, how come you quit? And they say things like, well, I just woke up one morning and I just thought, you know what? I don't want to light that cigarette. I'm done with this. There's some kind of unconscious shift that happens, right? And it's because they've been over time reflecting upon things and a cost-benefit analysis has changed, right? Or they suddenly see something differently. So one of the greatest instigators of change is what I often call the mind shift, where somebody suddenly sees something differently. They suddenly see that smoking isn't improving their life. It suddenly becomes absolutely clear, for example. Whereas before they kind of thought, actually, my life wouldn't be as good without smoking. Right? They get a mind shift like that, just using smoking as an example, right? And there's a lot of this around like social fears and this kind of thing. I'm doing the Creating Courage and Fearlessness program at the moment. A lot of that is about recognizing, actually, do you know what? That fear isn't serving me. It's not justified. It's not rational. It's not even real. It's a mind-made illusion that I have been rehearsing without question, without consciousness for a lifetime. Okay? So it's like when you start looking at it and you realize you get what you rehearse. This is why consciousness can change what we rehearse. Right? Can change what we connect with, can change our perspective. So change is a very natural, very organic thing. We have the faculty for change, consciousness, reflection. This is a powerful way to create shifts. When we start to learn to use it intentionally, and we're directing our attention according to our intention, and we're doing it in appropriate ways, then we can get profound shifts to happen. Now, last thing I'll say on this topic is if I do get somebody coming, I'm working with them and they're not necessarily overly open to the fact that people can change, right? And a lot more easily than they think. I employ a little trick that I learned from Andrew T. Austin, the neuro-linguist, or I don't know how he builds himself these days. But I get people to connect with an embarrassing memory, okay? And normally when people connect with a genuinely embarrassing memory, they feel quite a lot of that embarrassment, right? They feel it, they experience it in their body. And then I will take them through some small amount of processing, right? Because I'll scramble the internal pattern for how they access that embarrassment, right? The embarrassment isn't inherent in the memory, right? There's a construction, there's a process, there is a recipe that needs to be run in order to bring up the embarrassment, but they're just doing it entirely outside of consciousness. So take them through something to scramble that. When I learned this from Andy Austin, it was his IEMT process, which is an eye movement process, but I'll often do all sorts of things. I'll shift submodalities. I will open up sort of bandwidth, just shift into peripheral vision. I'll play with it in a variety of different ways, okay? But 99 times out of 100, you can get a very, very tangible shift in the experience within a minute or less, right? And the most common thing is an inability to access the feeling of embarrassment. So you could call this a hypnotic facilitation. You could call it, I don't know, call it what you want, psychoactive facilitation. This is what the skills of NLP and hypnosis are about, at least for me. Then when somebody gets that shift, I go, that's a really curious thing, because just now you couldn't help but feel that feeling, right? And they go, no. And I go, now just try and get that feeling back again, right? Think of the memory and what happens when you try and get the feeling back, right? They can't get it back, okay? So the point of the matter is people need to, I often use this metaphor, people need to move their minds in particular ways to get their problems, right? Their problems aren't just there. Their problems are a result, the mental experience of the problem is a result of a series of steps of mind. They need to move their mind in particular ways. So really, there's a sense in which when I'm doing change work, I am simply inviting people to move their minds in different ways and actually notice the experience that is created, the different experience. Notice the shift. When you get people to notice the shift, you get a difference, yes, but you get a difference that makes a difference because you use consciousness to help them notice the shift, right? Otherwise, you risk what I call the Churchill Principle kicking in. Okay, now allegedly Winston Churchill once said something like this: it is amazing how often in life people stumble over the truth, pick themselves up, dust themselves down and wander away as if nothing had ever happened. Okay, so you can get a profound shift in somebody, but if you do not bring it to their attention so as they witness that shift and experience that shift, there's a high likelihood that it'll just disappear. Right? They will wander away as if nothing had ever happened. I'm often saying, and I point out to clients often, that people are by default very poor witnesses to their own processes. They assume they are good witnesses to their own processes, but generally speaking, they are often not. This is why you get people who have been happy all week in a really great mood, and then they have a bad day, and they say things like, you know, I just feel so down these days. Right? Because they tend to generalize out. They're not a good witness to the fact that their mood was changing or going up and down. They get caught up in a bunch of self-hypnosis about how terrible they're feeling these days. Okay? So change is highly possible because we have the equipment to do it. Right? We get what we rehearse. We tend to live into the same sequences of thought. Right? We make our responses in our mind and then act like we're not making them, right? Because it's happening outside of consciousness. Once people's attention can be directed in useful ways, in ways that set up new generative feedback loops, then difference can emerge, and difference begets difference, and this is the engine of change. We human beings are, I emphasize, I say this once again, the paragon of learners, changers and adapters out of all species on this planet. Right? We have an incredible faculty for it. All that needs to happen is it needs for it to be directed in appropriate ways. Then huge, significant personal change is possible. That does not mean, however, you get to perfectly design exactly how you would want to be and make that so. That is a different thing. It is an organic process. It is an iterative process. There are feedback loops that drive it. Doesn't mean that's a long process just because there's iteration within it. There are many iterations that can take place within a single change work session or a single day when somebody's working with themselves, you know, but it is an iterative, organic process. It is not a linear design style process, in spite of what some people may attempt to tell you. Okay, so I hope this video has been of value for you. Whether you're a change practitioner or a coach or just somebody who's interested in having greater levels of personal mastery, whatever, this is a highly relevant topic to all of those categories and more. But if this has been useful for you, please do make sure you like the video. Please do like the video. The algorithm likes that, and that helps me to get these videos out into the world. If you got benefit, then that benefit gets shared. Please do also share this with anybody who might appreciate it. And if you have any questions, you can make use of the question section below. And please subscribe, hit the notifications bell. That way the YouTube algorithm says, you know, people want this content, it's more likely to promote it to the wider world. And of course, I completely respect your sovereignty to do none of the above, should you choose to do so. All right, thanks for being here, and I look forward to when we next connect.